The Grand Prix year of 1982 began in South Africa, where Johannesburg has recently grown some medium-sized skyscrapers and one very beautiful motor racing circuit about 20 miles out of town. It's called Kyalami and was just made for cars to go fast on. But for some time they didn't go at all because of a strike. For various reasons, there are few strikes in South Africa, but the drivers had brought one with them. Protesting against the terms of their licenses, the drivers, led by Didier Peroni, barricaded themselves into a hotel and refused to come out, leaving their team managers facing the possibility of having to drive the cars personally. Bernie Eccleston, head of the Brabham team and also Mr. Fix of Formula 1, wore all his hats simultaneously while having his usual word in somebody's ear. But the all-powerful Jean-Marie Balestre, evincing his usual charm, remained obdurate.
Any comment, Mr. Balestre?
Practice was cancelled. Except for the odd bit of pushing them backwards and forwards to see if the wheels still worked, the cars just sat there with patient mechanics putting funny signs on them. There would have been time to do proper illuminated manuscripts if they'd had the parchment and gold leaf. Not much moved in the pit area, except the usual young idealist dreaming of a chivalrous sport in which shining knights of the road joust with no thought of gain. Bernie went on having a word in somebody's ear, and eventually somebody realized that the waiting world wasn't interested in watching the cars stay still. Mr. Balestre gave his assurance that if the drivers came out of the hotel with their hands up, they would suffer no harm. They believed him, and out they came. One of them was the new world champion. One of them was an old world champion back from the fiery furnace. One of them deserved to be world champion, but didn't yet know that he never would be. If he had known, it would probably not have stopped him. He was brave. They were brave men all. They were the idols of millions, but only on the understanding that when the day came, they had to race, no matter what. So the engines came to life, and the Grand Prix year along with them. The Renaults, Ferraris and Brabhams led away on the warm-up lap, thereby stating the big theme of the season. The turbo cars went fast, especially at altitude, but except for the Ferraris, they tended not to get there. The Cosworth engine cars got there, but tended not to go fast. It was up to the turbos to be more reliable and the Cosworth to go more quickly. It would have been easy for the Cosworth cars to do this if the minimum weight limit had not been set so high by the rules, which somehow always tended to favor the turbo cars, thus inspiring the Cosworth team designers to various wheezes and devices. The chief wheeze and device for this year was water-cooled brakes. The car plus water got weighed by the scrutineers, and the car minus water started the race, hence lowering the weight and increasing the speed. Nobody believes it to be a good thing that serious designers, most of them grown men, should spend half their time dreaming up ways to bend the rules, but nobody knows how to stop it. Everybody knows it's madness, but it still goes on. The similarities between Formula 1 and World War I are striking to the detached observer, but no one can stay detached once the green light shines. Away they went with the 6 turbo cars in the lead, 2 Renaults, 2 Ferraris, 2 Brabhams. They were aided by the altitude, but would probably have been doing the same thing at sea level. The turbo teams looked magisterial, as if they were enjoying one of the big technical advantages which periodically divide the sport into 2 groups, those who got it and those who haven't. The turbo engine was the biggest thing since the ground effect, since the engine in the back, since the detachable cylinder head, since the inflatable tire. And out in front, even of the other turbos, ran the haughty Renaults, like Hode and Rosewall painted yellow. Piquet's sick Brabham BMW tried to go through a small hill instead of the long way round by road. For the reigning world champion, it was the portent of a frustrating year, but at the time it must have seemed only a temporary setback. More philosophical than angry, Keken took the firsts of what were destined to be several long walks, but there were still 5 turbos left at the front. There were 4 turbos left at the front after Villeneuve's Ferrari turned into a locomotive, but 2 of them were still the Renaults, with Prost leading Arnoux. The Renaults look very impressive touring around together, like Fangio and Moss, or Flanagan and Allen. But Arnoux led Prost after Prost's car turned into a tricycle. His front right wheel went up because his rear left had converted itself into an old wetsuit in a tumble dryer. It gave you some idea of how hard the cars are sprung. Someone should invent independent suspension and give the driver's battered bones a rest. Prost went in for a new wheel, presumably happy in the knowledge that his beloved teammate Arnoux was pulling away towards maximum points. Out on some obscure part of the circuit where cameras couldn't reach, Carlos Reutemann in his Cosworth-engined Williams inherited second place. The moody Carlos had decided that the turbos were vincible after all. With Carlos, an awful lot depends on his mood. If he feels like winning, he goes like the Argentine Air Force. If he feels unhappy, he fades away like the Argentine Army. Pironi's Ferrari conked out expensively. Prost was back on the track and pulling back what fate had taken away. Prost came right past everybody, giving us all the idea that the Renaults were going to do that every time. The remaining big news was that Niki Lauda, in his first race back from retirement, had quietly contrived to come fourth. But from him a miracle is the least you expect, so somehow this fact was not sensational, merely satisfactory. It was the turbos that were sensational, and especially the Renaults, and especially Prost, the winner. For ordinary engines, the writing was on the wall, and it was in French. If you were normally aspirated, you were short of breath. Get blown or get lost, that was the message. To rub it home, Balestri busted the striking drivers after all. Rio, where a mountain made of sugar rules the glowing skyline. Rio, where the per capita income would buy 1 cc of petrol for an old Coventry Climax. Rio, where the happy populace dress up every second day to provide fiesta footage for foreign camera crews. Rio, where the bouncing brown breasts of Brazil say an uninhibited hello in a language that even a Grand Prix driver can understand. The circuit is at sea level, like the beaches, but what could stop the turbos now? Through the stunning heat, the turbos once again led away, with the flying Villeneuve out to prove that though his teammate Pironi could lead a strike, he, Villeneuve, could lead a race. The Renaults were up there too, but somehow Keke Rosberg's Cosworth Williams had included itself in the party. Didn't the normally aspirated Rosberg know that he was supposed to be obsolete? Keken was also much in evidence, moving at a speed that was not supposed to be in the script, moving even faster than Rosberg. Having lifted the turbo BMW out of his Brabham and replaced it with a demothballed Cosworth, he too was up there where he shouldn't be, temporarily accompanied by his teammate Patrese, two Brabhams selling twice as much Parmalat sliced ham to the watching millions. But for the moment, it didn't matter whether people were changing one kind of engine for another or running the car with a different kind of engine at each end, because Villeneuve was out in front showing what sheer brilliance can do. He reminded you of a long line of Ferrari drivers whom the public paid to see go faster than anyone else, some of them for year after year, like Ascari, some of them for only a few laps, like Castellotti, who in the Mille Miglia used to drive on the footpath because the road was full of Italian spectators. Brabhams and Rosberg's cheeky Williams stayed in amongst the majestic Renaults. For various reasons, one of the rarest sights in Formula 1 racing is racing cars actually racing each other. The crowd likes it, but it makes team managers nervous. They would rather see their cars off on their own up at the front with nothing to worry about except pit signals. So it might have been about this time, for future reference, that it began occurring to the Brabham Joint Chiefs of Staff how much faster their cars would go initially if not full of such impedimenta as, say, petrol. But all that lay in the future. For now, the Brabhams were doing nicely enough. Everyone was doing nicely. It was a real race. When Piquet went past Arnoux, the prospective Mrs. Piquet liked it. Until lap 30, it was a triangular nail-biter between Villeneuve, Piquet and Rosberg. Piquet went past Rosberg and the whole of Brazil liked it. Piquet closed on Villeneuve and Brazil liked it even better. But then Rosberg passed Piquet and Brazil hated it. Then Piquet pulled back again past Rosberg and the Brazilians went berserk. Piquet was up with Villeneuve. They went insane. Villeneuve went into a fence. They were ecstatic. That left Piquet and Rosberg, with Rosberg taking the heat better than Piquet and a lot better than Patrese, who briefly did immaculate three-point turns around an imaginary circuit about 50 feet in diameter, before dimly realizing that it was time to go in and have a nice lie down. Piquet, resting his head against the side of the cockpit to take the weight off his neck, somehow managed to hold off the bull-strong Rosberg, the man from a country no Brazilian has ever heard of, the man that the British media were already calling the Flying Finn. Rosberg's sudden rise to celebrity plunged Carlos Reutemann into a dark mood that was eventually to lead him back to Argentina and into oblivion. It was only last year that Piquet had pipped Carlos for the World Championship. Now the world champion had finished first again, a result that was extremely popular with the population of Brazil, most of which was present. Piquet passed out on the victory dais and had to sit down to spurt the obligatory magnum of heavily promotional champagne. He would have felt even weaker had he known that the race would be taken away from him on a technicality, but more of that later. Onward to Los Angeles for the Long Beach Grand Prix, with the big question ringing in our ears. Is your car a heavy breather, or does it have a Benzedrine inhaler? Long Beach is a tight street circuit where the turbos are meant to be at a disadvantage, but so were the Cosworths at Rio, so who knows? There was a lot of local atmosphere. Local people were politely curious about the imported cars. A customized roller skate? They retaliated with a specially built armoured car for Balestri to attend meetings in. The Formula 1 DeLorean. What is it that brings women to see men race cars? Here was a man who had the answer.
Cars going around the track is not the big deal. Believing in God's a big deal.
But the engines drowned him out. Lauda had merely finished 5th at Rio, as if he were a normal human being like you and me. But at Long Beach, he dominated practice, quietly putting in the fastest laps right up until the final session, when De Cesaris, in his Alfa Romeo, noisily went faster than everybody, took the pole and led the race, getting quite a long way before he had his usual accident. This time a lot of other things had to happen first. There wasn't much room for overtaking, the circuit being a bit reminiscent of Monaco, minus the palace, the casino, the architecture, the yachts, and the close proximity of France. Expensive engines revved hungrily in the hairpins. Frustration built up, and some drivers began to wonder if there weren't other ways to pass the car in front apart from going round it. De Cesaris' Alfa teammate Giacomelli got past Lauda by the novel method of declining to brake for the next corner. He drop-kicked Arnoux out of the race. Arnoux hardly laughed at all. Lauda went after De Cesaris. De Cesaris had the advantage of youth. Lauda had the advantage of experience. Some say he had the advantage of brains. De Cesaris lined up to pass a back marker without realizing that his subtle maneuverings would leave Lauda a glimpse into the clear. To Lauda, that one chink of light was an open door. After 15 laps, he was past De Cesaris, leaving the young Italian no alternative but to have his standard crash later on. Villeneuve pressed on brilliantly, as did Rosberg, Turbo versus Cosworth. For several laps, the racing cars were racing. The Ferrari was lightning in the straights and custard in the corners, despite the theoretical aid of a sailplane rear wing providing extra something or other. Downforce, upthrust, advertising space, nobody knew. There was an interesting moment when Rosberg went past Villeneuve. The watching world, which doesn't know much about relative handling qualities, was left wondering whether the Williams wasn't faster than the Ferrari. If it wasn't, then maybe Rosberg was as good as Villeneuve. Villeneuve was very keen to prove that couldn't be right and put his foot down firmly. Villeneuve's pressure-packed driving finally had its inevitable result, but he found first gear again and recovered to arrive third, when we all finally found out what the rear wing was for. It was to get him disqualified, under that special morale-busting official dispensation, which ensures that a driver must first lay his life on the line before being told that all his efforts are in vain. So Patrese was third, Rosberg was second, and Lauda was supreme, right back on top, a place he knows well. The San Marino Grand Prix was held at Imola in Italy, there being no room to hold a Grand Prix in San Marino unless it is contested on a tabletop with very small electric cars. except for the dogged Tyrrells and a few teams with names like brands of orange juice. Imola was a non-Cosworth occasion, boycotted by the Fokker teams because of FISA's retroactive decision to call the water tank wheeze illegal. This meant, among other things, that Piquet's win at Rio had been an optical illusion and that Rosberg hadn't come second. Prost's Renault had actually won at Rio, even if, to the unaided eye of the average earthling, it had appeared to come third. At Imola, the Renaults were 2 of only 14 cars present, but the race was sensational anyway. The real story of the race was that the Renaults fell apart and the Ferraris didn't. The story took a while to unfold, however, and at the start the lemon yellow cars were in front. Then the Ferraris got in amongst them, and Arnou's car developed the sulks. The Ferraris went past Arnoux, and his car sprained a turbo in protest, gushing those characteristic gouts of flame, which the trained eye was learning to associate with a surge of disappointment in the Gallic engine room. The Ferraris swept on. They should have swept on as per team orders, with Villeneuve first and Pironi second. That's what the contract says, and common sense says the same, because a team leader is hired to win for his manufacturer and can't be expected to do it if he has to race his backup man as well. The late Ronnie Peterson once spent a whole season coming second to Mario Andretti when they were both driving for Lotus. Peterson was at least as fast as Andretti and would have been glad to prove it, but his signature meant more to him than glory. But that was another age. Pironi decided to have it out with Villeneuve. Ferrari pit, no doubt in telephonic communication with Commendatore Enzo Ferrari at Maranello, told Pironi to let Villeneuve through. Pironi didn't. He had a long think about whether he wanted to be first or second, and decided he wanted to be first. The resulting scrap, with Villeneuve sometimes ahead but more often not, was very thrilling for the spectators, but its effect on Villeneuve was unhealthy at the time, and to hindsight seems tragic. If he had managed to beat Pironi, things might have been different, but he didn't, so only Pironi finished the day with a light heart. Villeneuve declared his intention of not speaking to Pironi again for the rest of his life. The quarrel would have faded away with time, but alas, Villeneuve had no time. In the last qualifying session for the Belgian Grand Prix at Zolder, Villeneuve had one last chance to better Pironi's time. Villeneuve had often complained about the absurdity of trying for fast times on a crowded track with qualifying tyres which had only one quick lap in them, and the consequent temptation to keep the foot down when it should come up. And that was just what happened. Flat to the floor, he came up behind Jochen Mass, who moved one way to let him through when Villeneuve was moving the same way to get past. The little red car went up in the air, tore itself to pieces and threw Villeneuve away. He was a poet of a driver, a star of the sport, and his loss was a hard way to be reminded that the higher the excitement, the higher the price. The race went on, with the two Renaults once again at the front and the standard pile-up happening at the rear. The Ferraris had been withdrawn as a mark of respect for Villeneuve, but the Brabhams were back at school after playing hooky from Imola, during which time they had once again switched engines and turned back into being turbos. Rosberg, in the brand new Williams FW08, got right up behind Arnou's Renault. Since the new Williams was by the team's own confession only half set up, it looked like a whole new lease of life for the Cosworths. Rosberg's name was beginning to bulk as large as his body. Rosberg went past Arnoux. Sick with chagrin, the Renaults ritually fell to pieces. With turbos lying conked out all over the landscape, surely it was in the bag for Rosberg. It would have been a fabulous first for the Flying Finn and the wickedly fast Williams FW08. Neither of them had yet won a Grand Prix. But far back, John Watson had decided that he liked the feel of his tyres. They were sticking to the track in a very reassuring manner. He caught up with his teammate Lauda. He stayed very close to his teammate Lauda, who sensibly realized that Watson had better wheels on the day. He went past his teammate Lauda. One by one, he went past nearly everybody, while the Brabhams were joining the Renaults in the turbo boneyard. It was the beginning of a whole new John Watson technique called winning from the back. All marveled, including, at the last moment, Rosberg, because Watson went past him too. Rosberg had shaved his tyres bald getting ahead of Lauda, and there just wasn't enough of them left to shut Watson out. So Watson went by to a popular win. It did something to take away the sadness of Villeneuve's death. Lauda was disqualified from third place because his car was 3 pounds underweight, which paid him back for daring to turn up at Imola and tell all concerned that politics were killing a great sport. Next stop, Monaco, where as yet nobody could guess that Princess Grace was in the last year of her rule. Monaco is a sort of Long Beach, minus the Queen Mary, but plus everything else. Bjorn Borg sleeps there between tournaments, wearing his headband in bed and waking up occasionally when one of his rackets explodes with the tension. Monaco is Toyland, but there has to be somewhere for toys to go. As a gesture to the past, the cars of old did their stuff. Ferrari, Bugatti, Maserati. Just imagine, most of them used to have engines in the front, a seat instead of a bed, and no wings, not like cars at all. Crossed hands in a black Bugatti in the days when you could see the driver's arms. None of that now. As always, the race started impressively, with no suggestion that it was going to be choreographed in its later stages by Jacques Tati, his last great comedy before taking a final bow. Arnoux Renault led away, with Giacomelli and Patrese heading a big queue to watch the Frenchman pull out an even bigger lead. Was this part of a new Renault tactic to build up such a thick cushion that there would be time to redesign the car after it disintegrated? On the balconies, learned opinion was divided. On and on went the flying Arnoux, with Prost moving up inexorably to second place. For a full 15 laps, the Renaults were so dominant it was daunting. What had gone right? And then Arnoux gave us the reassurance that everything was normal. Prost went by into first place, warming himself with the thought that his beloved teammate was walking safely back to the hotel for a hot bath and a rub down. Prost was more than capable of doing the whole thing on his own. The nearest car behind his was so far back it was ahead of him. Out over the mountains, a small rainstorm was gathering, but that was no reason to lift the delicately sandaled Gallic foot. A flag marshal either tried to tell Prost about the possibility of rain, or else was merely pointing to a passing airliner belonging to Niki Lauda. It was dry in the tunnel, but outside the sun was veiled elegantly by French rain. Perhaps Prost should have slowed down. Perhaps not. He should have slowed down. He had got all the way to lap 74, which was a high proportion of the 76 laps required, but not quite high enough. Prost walked home again while Patrese Brabham took the lead. Patrese, looking as if the race was his, forged on with only 2 laps to go. In the Brabham bunker, they were already tying an Italian tricolour ribbon on Patrese's medal, the OBE, the Order of Bernie Eccleston. It was going to be the first ever Grand Prix victory for the Parmalat-fed boy from Padua. But at station hairpin, he mistakenly decided to try finishing the race going backwards. That left Pironi in the lead, going slowly because of the wet track, and not just because the nose of the Ferrari had fallen off. Going very slowly because of the wet track. Going inexplicably slowly, even if the track had been a canal. 1 lap from the end, he rolled to a stop, having fallen victim to that obscure mechanical malaise known to the Italian designers as mancanza di benzina, or absence of fuel. The Cesaris parked on a zebra crossing and went looking for a filling station. Daly was also out. That left the position of first place open for practically anyone who could get his engine started. Patrese stalled at the hairpin, rolled down to the harbour front, bump started, put in a gradual last lap, and won. The crowd cheered as if it all made sense. Patrese was so pleased he gave the glum Pironi a lift home, thus proving that the Brabham is not only very fast, but strong enough to carry 2 people in addition to all the advertising. If the black Bugatti had been in the race, it would probably have finished first, but as things were, the Brabhams had something to compensate them for Piquet's gearbox, which fell to bits on lap 49. The world champion was getting very short of points, even if the season still had a long way to go. The Grand Prix circus went back across the Atlantic to Detroit, a town where imported automobiles aren't always a welcome sight. But Formula 1 cars don't threaten anyone's job, so the puzzled spectators were all smiles.
I think it's nice.
I think it's great for the city of Detroit, and the interruption I think is well worth it.
Fantastic.
I think it's all right. I think Detroit needs something like that.
I think it's really exciting.
Have you ever seen that sort of racing before?
No,
You going to be here on Sunday?
no.
I believe we build the best cars in the world here, and what better place to have a race than the Motor City?
The circuit for Detroit's first Grand Prix wasn't even finished, hence no practice. The drivers did a lot of being just one of the boys and stuff like that. After a grand total of 2.5 minutes practice, the grid order was decided by colour of hair. When the race finally got underway, the drivers, with Prost first and Rosberg and the Cesaris on his tail, were heading into the unknown, so a minor shunt was only to be expected. Patrese, perhaps still tasting the champagne from Monaco, went off. A fire marshal covered a flag marshal with foam. The flag marshal wiped his eyes with a red flag, and the race stopped for an hour. Ample time for all the major teams to rebuild their cars. After the restart an hour later, Prost and Rosberg were away again. Turbo versus Cosworth at sea level. When Rosberg went past Prost, the Renault died of shame. Prost must have missed a gear when he saw Rosberg make a U-turn down the escape road. But the real news was Watson, who was once again doing his top gear from the rear number, this time from an impossible 18th place on the grid, which was practically the same as starting the race in England. He went past Giacomelli, and Giacomelli disposed of himself pressing the wrong pedal. He climbed through the field until there were 3 cars separating him from a crack at the leader. Lauda's McLaren, Chiva's Ligier, and Peroni's Ferrari. In a single lap, the lap of the gods, one by one he nailed them all. That left only Rosberg in front, and eventually the inspired Watson gathered him in too. Watson's finely tuned philosophical spirit should have been shaken to jelly by the Detroit track, but this year Hamlet was turning into Fortinbras, or to put it another way, having got used to losing, he was now getting used to winning. So Watty was on the victory dais for the second time in 3 races and leading the World Championship. A big step in his one-man crusade to prove that nice guys can finish first. Montreal wasn't far away, but the track, now renamed the Circuit Villeneuve, was a different matter. It was turbo heaven. Even the air was right. It was a chill day and turbos loved the cool. Alas, the first lap saw young Riccardo Paletti die in his Osella, which rammed Peroni's stalled Ferrari from behind at 100 miles per hour plus. All you can say is that the danger is part of it, and that there is truth in danger. Not all of the truth, but some of it, and that you can't stop men looking for it. But Paletti came to the end of his search awfully early. The car was bung full of juice. Perhaps they should have doused it before they touched it. Saying what should have happened is a way of keeping busy while you watch helpless. Peroni, being a professional driver, got a new car and led the race when it restarted 2 hours later. But it was too much to expect that a car which hadn't been dialed in could stay out there in front for long. Eventually, Peroni was obliged to yield the lead. Arnoux was once again up front. Giacomelli and Mansell stopped to exchange names and addresses, while the rest of the field chased the Renaults. But Piquet was up there with them. All Piquet had to do was wait. The Brabham BMW that hadn't even reached the race in Detroit was now going very fast indeed. The only question was whether it would last. The same question did not arise in the case of the Renaults, since it was well known that they wouldn't. Arnoux stayed close to Piquet, and for a while it looked just as if they were racing, but it couldn't last. Arnoux spun out and left Piquet all alone. Arnoux showed the marshals how to push his car, saying things in the French language, which they kindly pretended not to understand. Far away and a long way back, Prost must have heard him and blew a turbo as a mark of respect. That left the two Brabhams well ahead, and behind them everybody else was running out of petrol again. The Chasers was still looking for a filling station. Daly downed tools in sympathy. Piquet came in first, but through a long traffic jam of parked racing cars, John Watson arrived to take third place and look at least as much like the next world champion as the current world champion did.
And we'll be needing a guide. Yeah.
Hey, it's far.